Okay, so I wanted to start off by seeing if I had any volunteers to play me, and then I will, as the game, I'll show the game, and I will go through my thoughts during the game. So, Katie, did you want to? Your hand seems to be up. Okay. So if I will challenge you. Mm-hmm. It should be somewhere in the top right of the screen. Okay, so the game has started. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen. And here we go. Katie has the white pieces. Katie, if you could just make it so you can't hear me, so I don't distract you during the game, that would be okay. All right, so she goes 1d4. This is a good move. I'm going to do the same. We'll see what happens now. Bishop f4, so this is a good developing move. I will also develop, try to control the center with knight f6, controlling the e4 square. Knight c3. Okay, so usually, as a rule of thumb, in positions where both sides have moved their queen's pawns like this, moving your knight in front of your c pawn, for example, if I were to go knight c6, is not an amazing idea because simply because of the fact that you usually want to move your c pawn either to c5 to attack in the center or to c6 to defend, and you don't have that option if your knight's there. By no means a terrible move, though. So let's see. I could get a piece out. If I go there, she might play the move knight to b5, though, and threaten to take this pawn. That seems slightly irritating, so I think I will simply stop that by moving my c pawn to defend my center and stop knight to b5. Just to be safe. I don't think it's anything to worry about because I can always bring my knight out to defend backwards. However, this is a good reinforcing move. Okay, so she brings her knight out to the side of the board. So this knight doesn't really do much here. It probably would have been better on f3. I have the option. The first thing I notice is that I have the option to capture that with my bishop. So if she takes back, then her pawns would be in this formation, which is generally not something that's good. However, in this case, I don't think it's worth trading this bishop at this point, simply because the bishop is very strong and the knight doesn't really do anything. So I'm going to bring my bishop out instead to the center of the board, possibly try to put some pressure on this c pawn. C pawn meaning it's a pawn on c2, like a c square. So this is also c pawn, obviously. We'll see what happens. Probably a good move here for white is to try to get this bishop out or try to get the queen out, maybe by e3 and then challenging my bishop. That would be a good option. So far the position is about equal. Oh, okay. So sadly, she moves the queen out to a square where I can simply take it with my bishop, and then when she takes back, I will have gained her queen for a bishop. We said a queen was worth 9 and a bishop was worth about 3, so that's a very good trade for me. So I'm going to take it. A queen is worth about 3 bishops. Neither side has 3 bishops, so you probably won't get the opportunity to trade your queen for 3 bishops. But that's simply that's just a general rule, or a bishop and 2 knights and a bishop, etc. Because a bishop and a knight are worth approximately the same. So she can take back either way here. She chooses not to. That might have been. I'm not sure if she meant to play this, but accidentally played this. However, okay, so now I have a full queen. She didn't take my bishop back for it. So I can either take her bishop and she would take back, which would be an even trade, or I can capture a pawn. And that would be a little better because I've gained some material. So I'm going to take the pawn. Nothing can take me here. This bishop also stops her from castling. She could castle queenside, but when I'd like to just point this out, when one of the squares that your king either passes through, like it passes through the d1 square or onto the c2 square or onto the c1 square, if one of those squares is attacked, you can't castle queenside. So this move would not be allowed. She simply chooses to attack my bishop though, so now I need to either defend it or retreat it. I don't see a way to defend it. so I'm going to treat it. I have this square, or this square to retreat it to without losing it. Probably I won't put it on the e4 square because she can take it with her knight, and I don't really want to allow her to do that as her knight isn't an amazing piece right now. However, bishop e4 is a fine move. I could put it on f5, or I could put it on g6. It doesn't make a huge difference. I am going to back it up to f5 just to give myself the option eventually of capturing this knight, maybe. One problem with going to f5 is that possibly she can orchestrate f3 followed by one of these pawn pushes that would attack my bishop. I may be forced to move it again, which is something I don't want to do. I want to get the rest of my pieces out as quickly as possible. I will say the only reason I haven't been getting my pieces out in the opening, and she does it, the only reason I haven't been getting my pieces out in the opening is because I've been taking her queen and then a pawn. So that's slightly, if you see that opportunity, sometimes it's okay to stall your development. However, so now she's trying to threaten one of these moves, probably not e4, because in that case I would take, and capture again, and I would win a pawn. I'll show that afterward. So right now I want to get this bishop out, so I'm going to play pawn to e6. So now this bishop can come out, either to this square to challenge this bishop, this square to pin the knight to the king, or possibly more defensively to e7. Knight a4, so that's a good move. Her idea is to play knight c5, and then if I capture, she can take back with either the rook or the pawn, and she has a clamp on the c5 square. So I have a few ways to try to stop my opponent's plan. Often that's something you want to do. If you see something good for your opponent, and you see what they're about to do, you want to stop it. That's equally as important as pushing your own plans. So I see right now that if I bring my queen out with check, so that would be check to the king, it would also attack the knight. So that's a type of tactic called a fork. I attack the king and the knight. If the king moves, I simply take her knight. However, she can go back with knight to c3, which would block the check on the king as well as defend the knight. If you can see that, that's good. Her best move would be knight to c3. But then I've stopped this whole operation with knight a4 to c5. So I'm going to do it. Queen to a5, check. You'll notice the king becomes red because it's in check. Any king move would not be good because I take the knight. Blocking with the rook would not be good also because I take the knight. So the best move here, okay, so she does move a king move, and I can simply take the knight now, and it's with check. So another king move, usually you don't want to be forced to move your king out of the opening. I could try to give checkmate to this king. I do believe I have enough pieces to do that, but it's going to be much easier if I can simply get my pieces out first. So this knight looks like it would be good on the d7 square. Seems like a very natural development, and then I will push. Okay, so the knight comes to g5. So it kind of jumps into my territory trying to attack things, but there's not a real threat. So actually, I can simply attack this knight with the move h6. And now this knight needs to move because it's under threat by my pawn. So the knight gives itself up for a pawn. I simply take back, and I have gained black's knight, or white's knight, that is, for one pawn, which is a good trade for me. Bishop to c7. So again, she moves into my territory, but again, she can be kicked out. I can move my rook out of the corner to try to attack this bishop. Then that bishop would have to move. And so what I did here was I got my rook out with a gain of time. I gained time by forcing her to move this bishop again. So she sadly moves it to a square that I can capture it. I can take with either the knight or the pawn, but I believe taking with the knight's better, because then maybe I will jump my knight into this square, which is close to her king. Notice I could check the king a lot here. I could, give check, the king moves, give another check, but the king would continue to run away. So now I notice the opportunity to make another favorable trade, this bishop for this rook. So I'll capture. She has the opportunity to capture back. If she does, I see that my knight will be under attack, and I will move it. So I would want to move it to the c4 square, which is close to her king. Instead of retreating it, I want to move it. I notice that if I go here, she might be able to play pawn to b3, which if my knight's here and my queen's here, she'll be attacking both. But then I can simply give a check with my queen and then move my knight. So she does have this fork opportunity to attack both of my pieces. If I move my knight, she would take my queen, but I can give check with my queen. I know visualization like this during a game can often be hard. So if you can see that in your head, if you can see like b3, I take with check, the king moves, I take this pawn. If you can see that, that's a very good thing. Often chess players need to sort of look into the future during their games. So now I have a lot of my pieces out. During a normal game, I would try to use this rook, but I believe it's very simple to instead. What's the best way to do this? I'm going to play queen to c2, which does threaten queen to d2 checkmate. The knight would defend the queen, and the king would have nowhere to go because the queen takes all the squares. White can stop this by taking my knight, but then I will simply take back and try to use my rook. Okay, so she does take. Now, I could take with the queen, or I could take with the pawn. This is often a decision you have to make. In most cases, it won't really matter, such as in this case, where it doesn't really matter. However, I believe that when I take, that would open up a line for one of my rooks. So I could use this rook, and then try to attack down this open line. So I'm going to take this way. Taking with the queen is also fine, obviously, but it keeps me from getting one of my rooks into the game. So I'm going to take this way. She can play pawn to e4, which would attack my bishop. However, I can simply threaten checkmate, rook d8, and something like that. So what I'm talking about might be a little advanced. It's possible that it's a bit difficult to follow. However, this is simply my thought process. So e4, and the more you play, the more you'll be able to notice things about the position, and the better you'll get, basically. So I noticed that if I put my rook on d8, I would be threatening checkmate with rook to d1, checkmate. This is a very common mate, like the rook takes all the squares on the back rank and the queen takes all the squares on the next. So I will make a threat. In fact, I don't see how white defends that threat. Now I'm giving up my bishop, but I notice that if she takes my bishop, I give checkmate, and checkmate is much more important than losing a bishop. Okay, g4, she chooses not to take it, but I still have this checkmate on the back rank. Let me just check. The king cannot move anywhere. It cannot go here because my rook would take it. It can't go here, here, or here because my queen would take it. She can't take my rook because I would simply capture back. So I see that that's checkmate, I play it, and the game ends. Okay, so she offered a rematch. I don't think we have time for that, so I'm going to decline. Oops, did I not press the decline button? Okay. Now, okay, Katie, I don't if you can make it so you can hear me again, that would be good. Okay, so this was a very interesting game. I just talked about it, obviously. The opening was good. I liked how you got your pieces out. I played c6 because I was partially worried about the threat of knight to b5, takes on c7. For example, if I just if I just kept getting my pieces out and I ignored it, the knight would take on c7, possibly. If I didn't stop you, the knight would take on c7 with check to the king. I can't take this knight with my queen because the bishop would simply take my queen, and that would not be good. So I would have to move my king somewhere, and then I would lose my rook. The knight forks the king and the rook. This is a very common pattern, one that would be helpful to commit to memory. However, after knight to b5, one way of stopping this is knight to a6. Usually you don't want to put your knight on the side of the board, but in this case it's the only way to defend the threat. Now if knight takes c7, the black knight can capture. And if bishop takes knight, queen takes, now I have two bishops, and you only have one. So that would not be good. I would be able to defend that threat. However, I chose to stop it before it happened with c6. Now if knight to b5, I just take it. Knight to h3. So this puts the knight on the side of the board. Generally, the knight would be better here. However, not lost yet. Yeah, the big move that was a problem was queen d3, as you probably noticed during the game, which just allowed me to get ahead. And then I couldn't tell if this was a mistake or not. I couldn't tell if you meant to take or you simply wanted to play e3. Either way, the rest of the game we all saw what happened. Okay, so now I hope you guys, I hope that was interesting, listening to like how you might think during the game. Sometimes we look ahead into the position to see what's going to happen. Now I'm going to transition. If you were here last time, I ended on a brief note that touched upon what I wanted to talk about. So last week, we started with these games. One of the games was Anderson Kaisertsky, the Immortal game. We looked at this. We found it very interesting, I hope. And at the end, I started to talk about how important it was to know some very basic endgames. So I wanted to talk about this a little more. The top players in the world, the best players, they can recognize thousands of endgame positions. I actually should probably clarify what an endgame is. It's near the end of the game, obviously. You probably could have guessed. Usually the queens are off the board. There aren't many pieces left. And that's about all that qualifies for endgame. So this is definitely an endgame because all that's left are kings and white has one pawn. If both sides have a few pieces, sometimes there's a blur between like mid-game and the end of the game, but this is clearly an endgame position. And there are also, so some endgames, they're obviously, they're important to remember because they come up a lot. So this is king and pawn endgames, meaning the only pieces left are kings and pawns, come up a lot in chess. Often, the side with the extra pawn is trying to win, or if neither side has an extra pawn, one person is trying to gain an advantage. If that cannot happen, the game would end in a draw. Top players can recognize thousands of endgames. They have sort of almost a database in their head of positions where they say, okay, I've seen this position before. I know how to win this position. And then they go on to win the game. Because if you're playing a serious game, it's much easier to know how to win the position because there are so few pieces left, you can just know how to win it, as opposed to like at the beginning of the game where there are a lot of pieces and your opponent has a lot of options. It's much easier to simply know how to best go about the position rather than to have to figure it out and reinvent the wheel over the board, or in this case, during a game. So in this position, we're looking at it from white's point of view. White has an extra pawn, and the situation is as follows. If white can make a queen, white will win. If white cannot make a queen, the game will be a draw. Okay. White does not want to draw in this position because white's better. So white has 4 legal king moves here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it because the pawn can't move as it's blocked by the king. 2 of them win and 2 of them draw. We talked about this last time. Can somebody name a move that would win the game here for white? And again, we after this, we will look at the position from black's point of view. Or not from black's point of view, but in the situation that it were black to move here. And we will see what the result is then, if that changes anything about the result. It often does, but sometimes it doesn't.
King
Yeah?
to d6.
King to d6. Okay, so that is one of the moves. White's king chooses not to back up, but instead decides to sidestep so we can try to queen the pawn. So black has three options here. One of them tries to stop white's king from moving forward. That would be king to d8. Now white's king can't move forward. Two of them walk away from the pawn. King f8. This would be like if black was adopting the strategy of run away, which is not very challenging because next move we will make a queen. Black wants to defend as stiffly as possible. So the best move for black here is king to d8. I talked about this last week. Do you remember what white should do here? Anybody? Yeah?
The pawn to e6.
Yeah, so white simply pushes ahead with his pawn. Now, black has two options. He can run away, in which case white will simply play e7, and he can't get back in time. Obviously, this is not allowed. This is not allowed because my king would take you. He would have to run away, then white would make a queen. So that's not very important. So instead, black decides to step in front of the pawn, and now white can choose either making a king move or a pawn move. Sam, what do you think?
King to d7.
King to d7, so that's not allowed. That would be good. That would be very good. That is actually the goal. We want to control the queening square. However, we want to make black move first before we can go there. So we have to insert another move first. Yeah?
King to c7.
King to c7. So that moves forward, but alas, it gives away control of the square e7. So black will move his king, and now white doesn't have a way to save his pawn, sadly, because he's moved away. So in this position, the best move is simply, Sam, did you want to?
Pawn to e7.
Pawn to e7, perfect. Now, if black could simply say pass, and he didn't have to make a move, some board games, you don't have to make a move, the game would simply be a draw, because black would sit on the queening square, and white would never make any progress. In fact, if it's white to move here, like say black just played king to e8, and it's white's turn, the game is also a draw. But we will look at that a bit later. So black is forced to move here. He doesn't want to, but he's forced to, and he only has one legal move, king to f7. Now, we looked at this last time. If white were to, when pawns reach the end of the board, they can either make a queen, knight, rook, or bishop of their own color, obviously. We're going to look at always making a queen because the queen is the most powerful piece. Only in very certain scenarios would you want to promote to one of these lesser pieces. Say white makes a queen. Now, if black simply moves away, white would checkmate with this queen, as we will look at later. But black can simply take. And now king versus king is a clear draw. The game would end here. There's no more playing on. The game is declared a draw because king versus king can never be won. However, white can try to control the queening square. How does white do that? He has one winning move here. What do you think?
King to d7.
Okay, king to d7. White defends his pawn. Actually, any other king move, say king c7 maybe, just gives up white's pawn. And you don't want to give up the pawn because, again, king versus king is a draw and white is trying to win. King to d7. Perfect. And no matter where black goes, say he goes here. Doesn't really matter. White would promote his pawn to a queen. And we can stop looking here because we know white, I haven't taught how to checkmate with the queen yet. Actually, that's very important. If you reach this position, it's very important to know how to win it, even for beginners. You might not often reach positions like this, but in the case that you do, knowing how to actually execute the win from here, like white is winning, but how to actually win the game is very important. I will talk about that later today. So then white makes a queen and the game is won. So let's go back to the beginning position. White needs to step either way. Let's say he steps to f6, just to prove that this also wins. The black king stays, and white can simply push the pawn. Push again. King has to move, and finally white outflanks the king, meaning So white wants to be able to move forward to control the queening square, but the king is not letting him. So he forces the king to move, pushes, the king is forced to move again, and the white king can finally gain space and make a queen. Or the other way, king to d6. Now if the king steps out of the way, white obviously just controls the queening square and will win the game. His next moves will be e6, e7, and making a queen. Black has no way to stop this because the king defends the pawn in all scenarios. Let's say he goes back, e6, goes here, e7, he moves, and white's already defending the queening square, so he wins. So that is how this very simple position is won, from if it's white to move. Now, if you reach it from black to move, it's somewhat different. I hope this isn't too hard to remember. It's not crucially important that you memorize this right now. It's just important that you know the basic concept, right? That you can move the king out of the way, and white's position is so strong that he doesn't need the king to control the queen square right away. He can simply push the pawn and force black's king to move. So now we'll look at it. If it's black to move, black has two different moves here. In fact, white's position is so strong with the king on the 6th rank on e6. This is the 6th rank, and the pawn on the 5th rank on e5. White's position is so strong and so advanced that he wins no matter who it is to move. I'm going to slightly spoil the result here. I apologize. But it's actually easier when it's black to move. So white wants to be able to advance, probably to one of these squares, and get out of the way of the pawn and then simply push it. But black's king stops it. If black doesn't have to move, well, that's what we just looked at. It's slightly harder than this. If black does have to move, whichever way he moves, what is white's winning move here? I'll ask. Katie?
King to f6.
King to f6. So, this is a position we reached last time, but we reached it with black to move. Okay, or sorry, I'm sorry. We reached it with white to move. In this position, it is black to move. Black has to make a move now. We reached it with white to move, which was a win. However, when it's black's turn, he moves the king. And now if we tried the same technique as last time, right, let's just try it. e6. Okay, the black king will stay. e7, the black king moves, and oops, the other time we reached it where black had to get out of the way. But now, black stops the pawn and forces white to move. So white has two options here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of his king moves simply give up the pawn. That's a draw. And the only move that defends the pawn, oops, the game is over. White didn't win though. White gave stalemate. The black king is not in check by any of white's pieces. The pawn doesn't attack forward, obviously. The king does not attack. Black's king is not in check, but we didn't allow him any moves to make. He can't go here or here. Sorry. Because the pawn would take him. He can't take white's pawn or go here because the king stops that. So black is in stalemate and the game is a draw. The problem was this whole strategy doesn't work when it's the other person to move. So actually there's a very simpler way. If you realize that the goal is that the king wants to get to one of these squares and then push the pawn, you realize that it becomes relatively easy to figure out what white should play here. So what is the correct move, do you guys think? So black has just given way for the white king, and the correct move is king to d7. So there's a concept in king and pawn games that I want to briefly touch on, and that is called the opposition. So that is when the kings oppose each other, one player always has the opposition. I'm not sure why they use that term, but that's it's basically, think of it as you can gain space. You have the opportunity to gain space. Like white's king can advance. When the kings are one apart like this, like they could be here and here, or they could be here and here, or they could be here and here. The person who has to move has to give up some space. Okay, so in this case, black needs to move. In this case, white has the opposition, meaning he can gain space because black has to give it. Say black moves, king f8, either way. White gains space by a term called outflanking, which is a popular army tactic. Sometimes they outflank the opposing army. This is sort of the same thing. White takes the square that black has given him. So he has outflanked the black king. Let's look at that again. Black has to move. White takes the space. And then now no matter what happens, no matter what black does, it doesn't matter. Say he goes king to f7. White's king sort of creates a barrier here. Check. King moves. Pawn moves forward again. King moves again. And white is controlling the queening square, so he makes a queen. Let's go back. You'll notice when it's black to move here, it's relatively simpler, okay? Because I probably should have introduced this one first. But now that the hard one's out of the way, we can look at the simple case. So if he either gives up space this way, and then you push the pawn. Sorry, you push the pawn. Or if he goes the other way, what do you think white does now? He does the exact same thing, except Katie?
King to f7.
King to f7, correct. Now he takes the space on this side, and again, you'll notice the king creates a barrier and controls the queening square. It controls the rest of the squares the pawn is going to have to go to make a queen, and it doesn't matter what black does. It really doesn't. King c7, tries to go back, check, he goes somewhere, and white makes a queen. Even if black goes here, white makes a queen, and black cannot take it because his king would obviously be taken. White's king defends the black queen. So, okay, so we looked at this position from white to move and black to move. Now, if it's black to move, the way we just looked at, it's relatively simple. Black's king has to give space, and either way he goes, white takes it, or like this. However, if it's white to move, if it's white to move, now white needs to give space. In this case, black has the opposition because white has to move, and either side he moves to, technically, black could gain space. However, in this case, white gains a more important square and would make a queen. So the best idea for black when white needs to is not to outflank white like this, but simply to stop white's king from entering. And now white is forced to push his pawn because, again, if he goes back, black stops him from entering. If he moves, black stops him from entering. So he's forced to push his pawn. Now, black can't stay here. He can't keep stopping the white king from activating, so he has to move, and then the pawn is pushed again, and the king is forced to move. Now, this position, if it were white to move, we looked at that. He can't go to any of these squares because it's stalemate, and because he loses pawn, and he can't go here because the king is lost. Okay, so then white would push his pawn, the king moves, goes up, and you make a queen and win. Does that make sense? In this position, does everyone understand how white has to go about winning? He uses two different techniques depending on who to move it is here. This is the very simplest of king and pawn endgames. There are many much more complicated ones that require much more techniques, but those are for later. This is very important to understand right now. Does that make sense? Everyone good? Any questions? I'll take that as a no. Some people find endgames boring, but it's a necessity to learn them. So now, we haven't discussed, so what if we had a similar position, but everything was moved to the right? Imagine white's pawn is here, white's king is here, and black's king is here. I'm going to show you one such position. Okay, this is the same thing, but we're on the corner of the board. I want you guys to think here. It's white to move. White to move. Can white win? I'm going to give you some time. Oh, and if you think white can win, you'll need to think of like a line that would allow white to win with best play from black. Like maybe you say white can win because black can run away, and then white would make a queen. But that's obviously not the best play because black's just letting white do what he wants. Sam, what do you think? Can white win or is it a draw?
White can win.
White can win. Okay, so what should white do here to win?
King to G6.
King to G6. So black only has one move here. King to G8. Now what does white do?
Pawn to H6.
Pawn to H6. So now if black runs away, we all see that the pawn simply makes a queen next move. Black doesn't want to run away. So he tries to stop you. And now what does white play?
Pawn to H7.
See, here's the problem though. This is stalemate. Game's a draw. Because the pawn now this is the problem because when we were in the middle of the board, the black king could go to, I don't know, well, it wouldn't be the H file. Like if there was another row of squares to the right of the board, maybe like this would be I1, I2, I3, etc. Like black doesn't have the option of going diagonally over here because there's no square there. The board just ends. If we were in the middle, black would be forced to move like this. And the game would not be a draw, however, white would win. But in this case, king can't go here because the pawn takes it and the king can go to either of these squares, so the game's a draw. You could try another strategy from white. Hope that black will simply always stop you, and anytime you try to push the pawn, he'll go to the corner. So in this scenario, the game is actually a draw. This is just a point that I wanted to illustrate. Rook pawns, we call these rook pawns because they're on the, you know, the rook star here. This was white's pawn in front of his rook at the beginning of the game, so we call it a rook pawn when it's on the edge of the board. This would be a knight pawn if it was somewhere here because the knights start here. Bishop pawn, etc. Okay. With either rook pawn, meaning the pawn's on the side of the board, the game is a draw, no matter who it is to move. Actually, I'll show you that it's a draw with black to move too. Black has to give up space. Like in this scenario, white has the opposition because it's black to move and the other player has the opposition. So black has to go here. It's his only move. White can't. This isn't a move that's allowed. If it was, white would be winning, but it's not. So white would have to go here, and then we get the same thing. If white tries to push his pawn, king stops, and you either give up your pawn here with one of these king moves, or you give stalemate with this one. So this is just to illustrate the point that in any position that is like this one, like if white's king is here and white's pawn is here, or white's king is here and white's pawn is here, etc., anywhere, it doesn't matter where it is, I just put it in the middle of the board because it's the simplest. The game's a win. However, if it's on the edge of the board, the game is a draw. Which is why, if you're trying to win in an endgame, you want your pawn not to be a rook pawn. You want it to be any other pawn, in fact. And sometimes this can save the game for black. Okay, so now we've gone through the boring stuff. Okay, something slightly more exciting here. Now each player has 3 pawns. Okay, so it is white to move. White can try to get his king back and try to take black's pawns. Basically, whoever makes a queen here wins. White can try to run his king back, and his only king move would be to go here, but then black would simply stop him. If white tries to get closer, black stops him. This is called shouldering with the king. The black king sort of bullies white's king into not being able to move forward. And if white goes the other way, well, black runs and he gobbles up all of white's pawns. Say white's king tries to follow, but then black simply takes all of white's pawns, and this is an easy win for black. One of his pawns will be turned into a queen, and then he will checkmate the white king with that queen. Does that make sense? So white cannot use the strategy of, let's move my king. Like, for example, he tries to run, black stops it. Run, stop, run, stop, run. Stop. And black will simply pick up white's 3 pawns. There's no way of saving them. However, in this position, the original position, white is winning. White, if he plays correctly, if both sides play correctly here, white wins the game. Kind of crazy, just a little bit. I don't know if you guys find that crazy, but I did the first time. So white needs to find some way, I call this breakthrough, because white needs to find some way to break through with his pawns to try to make a queen. It involves sacrifices, it involves giving up a pawn. If you think you see it right now, you probably don't. I know the first time I saw this, it took me a long time to figure it out. So I'm going to give you guys maybe 2 minutes just to think, unless you've seen it. Has anyone seen this before? No, you've never seen it? Okay, so I'm going to give 2 minutes to think, just for everyone, so that if you think you know it, just try to remember what move you think white needs to play here. White is definitely winning, but to find the winning strategy is difficult. One more minute. Okay, Kavi, I see you have your hand up. To unmute, you go into the bottom left, so I can hear your solution. Okay.
Pawn to c6.
Okay, pawn to c6. Did someone else find this as their move too? Anyone agree? Katie, you agree? Okay, so pawn to c6. So this is how white wins. So white is threatening to capture black's pawn. Like if black just moves his king, white will capture black's pawn and then he'll make a queen. So that's definitely a threat. The first thing probably consider, what if black takes it? What do you guys think you should do here? Katie, this was also your move, right?
Take back.
Take back? Okay. Now if black he can either move his king or he can push a pawn. Say he pushes a pawn. White doesn't have any more pawn moves. So in this position, white is in huge trouble. So he'll move his king, and then black will move his king, and then white will move his king, and black. Okay, we've seen this dance before, but black is closer to the pawns. Even if white tries to go the other way, black will pick up white's pawns with his king because his king is so much stronger than white's. So if we go back, black can take here. He also doesn't have to. He can simply play pawn to b6. And now if white takes, black will take back, and the pawns are locked again. So c6 doesn't look like it's working. That was a good guess, though. Did anyone come up with a different solution? Sam or Aranea, what did you guys think?
On to b6.
On to b6. Okay.
That was my other one.
So in this case, well, there were only 3 options. In this case, white has 2 threats. Chump and chump. Sorry, chump and chump. If black moves his king, white can either take on c7 and make a queen x move, or take on a7 and make a queen x move. Obviously, black's not going to let you do that. Now, if black takes, let's say he has 2 ways of taking. We have to examine them both. Let's say he takes this way. What do we think? Sam?
Pawn to b6.
So pawn takes b6, but which one? Do you mean this one? So A takes b6 or C takes b6?
C.
C, this one? Is that what you said? Okay, C takes b6. Now, black will take. And white, I mean, you can push your pawn and black will simply take it. Or, so white does have a chance of winning here if black severely messes up and goes c6. Now white sacrifices his pawn with a6. Now his threat is simply to take and queen, so black has to take it, and then even though black has an extra pawn, white's pawn is going to queen, and then with this queen, white will stop black's pawns. So that's sort of a hint. That's also what white does in the game. White has a very special move here, so we know that c takes doesn't work. A takes also doesn't work because black plays either one of these moves, say this one, and white would lose. Does that make sense? White loses here because black's king is much closer. Oops, sorry. That's A takes. White's move here, so we know it's not taking the pawn back. Oops, oh my god, bad with errors today. We know it's not taking the pawn back. So what do we think here?
Pawn to c6.
Pawn to c6. So this is kind of crazy, right? White already has only 2 pawns to black's 3. Instead of taking back, he goes pawn to c6. So he's threatening to take black's pawn. For example, if black takes, white takes, and again, he makes a queen much faster than black does. Black takes 4 moves to make a queen, and white will already have a queen by then. White will win. And if black takes, now what does white play? This was sort of required to see when you played c6. This is correct. You just one more move, and white. Kavi, what do you think?
Pawn to a6.
Pawn to a6. Boom. White wins. That's it. White wins the game. Black has 3 pawns. White had to give up 2 of his pawns, but white has one that's going to make a queen. For example, white makes a queen the strongest. If white makes a rook here, I think he also wins, but it's very difficult. When he chooses to make a queen, if black tries to push his pawn, the queen will give check. He'll take this pawn, and then the queen will take this pawn, and then the queen will take this pawn, and white will win. So this is kind of crazy. White pushes. If black takes, he pushes another pawn, makes the threat of taking. And if black takes, well, now this pawn can't be stopped. So from the beginning, after b6, you had to notice that either way he, and okay, so also if he plays c takes, now white plays a6. This pawn, this is kind of hidden, this is the hidden idea. This pawn has to stop both white's a pawn and white's c pawn from queening. So white threatens. Now black's pawn is diverted, and now nothing can stop white's pawn from queening. Beautiful, right? Do you guys have any questions about this? You see why white wins here and why b6 is the correct move? Is that we all good? Okay, I will take silence as a yes. So now the entire day we've looked at positions where white ends up making a queen, but we haven't looked at how you actually win with the queen. That's what we're going to look at now. This is just a position where white has a queen. Black's king is in the middle of the board. So the strategy is basically to try to get black's king onto one of the edges. Trap it on one of the edges. For example, if black just walks to one of the edges, let's say, I don't know. Let's say white makes 3 moves. Black just walks on one of the edges. Now, white traps black's queen. White traps black's king with his queen. Now the king cannot step off of the back rank because the queen will simply guard all of those squares forever. And white's king will be able to, okay, so let's just give an example. Black waits forever because he can't really do anything. White's king walks. And here, if you can get your queen in front of their king, and your queen is defended, this is checkmate. Because the queen is so strong, it controls all of these squares. All of these squares, and the king is in check. So the game's over. Does that make sense? If we have black's king on the edge of the board, say this was the starting position. If we have black's king on the edge of the board, it's very simple. White simply walks his king here, and then gives checkmate. Does that make sense? So the first step is trying to get black's king to the edge. You'll notice the queen creates sort of a box. Right now, there's not too big of a box. Black's king is confined to these squares, right? This is the outside of the box. you know where I'm going with this. This is black's box that he's confined to because the queen traps him. If you keep making the box smaller, eventually black will be forced to the edge. One strategy is make your queen a knight's move away from the black king. A knight's move away, as in if the queen was a knight, it would give check. So how does white do that here? He moves his queen a knight's move from black's king. That's the smallest you can make the box in this position. Sam?
Never mind.
Never mind. Okay. Katie?
Queen to c3.
Queen to c3. The queen is a knight's move from the black king. And now, you'll notice black's box just got a lot smaller, right? It used to be, oh no, my thoughts went away. I'm sorry. Okay, so now black's box is a lot smaller. If black simply goes here, white again makes his queen a knight's move from black's king. One way to do this is queen c4. So this is this. Oops, this was the box last time, and now this is the box. Sorry. It's smaller, right? So white progressively starts to trap black's king even more. Now black only has these 10 squares. Sorry, these 11 squares. 10 other squares than the one his king's on. And the second black steps on the back rank, the second black steps on the corner, white's queen simply traps him. And from this position, we already looked at, right? Black moves somewhere. And by the way, black's king, I want to point this out, black's king cannot attack white's queen ever. It's impossible because the queen controls all three of these squares. So the black king can't even get close. You could, in this situation, if he moves, keep making the box smaller. Right now your knights move away. Now this is the box. Now your knights move away. However, this is kind of scary, right? Because now if your knights move away, this is stalemate. And you would have just blown the wind. I've done this. It's not fun. Your opponent shakes her hand and says, "Good game. Thank you for not winning." White's queen now controls all the squares that black's king can go to. The box doesn't exist. Black has nowhere to move. The game is a draw by stalemate. So the closest you can get to the king, oops, wrong line. The closest, oh my god, the closest you can get to the king would be this. And now the box is as small as it can get. And white simply brings his king up. Okay, for example, these are the only two moves black can make. White brings his king up. Checkmate. King is in check. Nowhere to go. So does that make sense? White uses his queen to systematically take squares away from black's king. Now the only problem here is maybe black can play this move. And now the queen is already a knight's move away from the king. However, there are lots of ways to win here. For starters, you can try to use the king even before the king is cut off, but that's little complicated. Any move that's a knight's away from black. So now white has two ways to do it. He can go here or here. Let's say he goes here. Now the king can't step past these lines. If black keeps staying a knight's move away from white's king, white will go here and the box gets smaller. And then actually, let's do this a different way. Oopsie. Okay, so let's say white does this. Black gets a knight's move away, the box gets smaller, and then eventually, now white's queen might want to go here, but that doesn't exist. Eventually you can just switch, and you'll notice here, this is the king's box, but white simply goes here, and this is very, very winning. Black has to step on one of the edges, and then white's queen would trap him. Does this make sense? So it's not very difficult. There are much harder checkmates to do. Actually, I should probably go over what pieces you can and can't checkmate with. So let's go back to this king and pawn at games thing. If white makes a queen here, he wins. We just showed you that. If white makes a rook, he also wins. The checkmate is harder because the rook does not move diagonally like the queen does. Very difficult. Not very difficult, but it's more difficult than the queen checkmate. If white makes a knight, the game's a draw. There's no way to checkmate black king with a knight. You can't even make a position that is checkmate. And the bishop would also be a draw. The game simply ends here. You don't even play on because it's impossible. You can try it on your own time, like put the black king in the corner and give white a king and a bishop, try to make a position with checkmate. You can't. So white can mate with king. Let's go back here. King and rook versus king. King and queen versus king. If he has two bishops, that works too. If he has a bishop and a knight, that also works. And that's it. Just for reference. You probably won't get any of those, but that's what will happen. So we have 1 minute left. I'd like to show a game of mine. I'm not going to show the whole thing. This was the beginning. And eventually, skipping a lot, you got to a position like this. Again, skipping a lot. Queens were traded. I'm going really, really faster. This is really something to pay attention to. The rooks were traded. Skip a lot. The bishops were traded. And now, skipping a lot. White was up a rook. White takes all the pawns. And now, instead of saving my rook, I simply push the pawn. And this was like 2 days ago, which is why I wanted to show it. I thought it would fit in with the lesson. So here I went a knight's move away. He moved. Another knight's move away. He moved again. Another knight's move away. And now he was hoping for this, which would be a draw. We know that. We can recognize this. When the king is in the corner, you don't want to be a knight's move away. There should be sirens going off in your head. Stop yourself from doing this. Instead, I went here, and I brought my king in. I could have just gone here, but okay. Brought my king in and checkmate. So this actually does happen in real games. I want to point that out. So we've reached 2 o'clock. I'd like to just show you something that you can try to practice mating with the queen. If you do, this is the main page. Actually, yours might look like this. These are like challenges that people put out. If you go over here on the right to play with the computer, instead of the variant, so standard would just be like the normal starting position. They have a bunch of weird versions of chess here. Some of them are fun actually, but they're a little complicated. If you go all the way to the bottom from position, actually wait, there's an easier way to do this. If you go to analysis board, oh my god, I'm sorry, board editor, okay, you can just, it gives you all the pieces down here, so you can just make a position. So I made this position, wait to play. So yeah, you'll go to board editor. I apologize for that. It's much harder if you do it another way. So I just, like, you can drag pieces on the board here. This isn't a game, this is just making a position. I'm gonna take these off because that's not what I want. Then I would press continue from here with the little sword thingies. Play with the computer. So now you'll notice we're playing from position, and this is going to be the starting position. Maybe set it to level 8, the hardest. Give yourself maybe unlimited time. Take the white pieces, because it's not going to be very helpful if the computer just checkmates you. My game just started, so now I'm playing the computer. I'll go here. It'll take some time and move. Again. So you can practice against the computer is what I'm saying. So maybe try it before next week. Just prove to yourself that you can do it. I'll do it here quickly. Now he's on the edge, so I'll go here. And the computer will always play the best move, so you'll know it's not simply letting you beat it. And okay, you know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to bring my king up and I'm going to checkmate. So I will stop screen sharing now. If I can find the button. Okay. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. There's a lot of endgames. It might have been a little bit more boring than the other weeks. We're probably not going to examine endgames for a while again. But it's something you need to know. It's very important, and I hope you understood the lessons. If you ever get the positions in your own games, hopefully you'll know how to win them. So before next week, maybe just keep playing and practice that endgame against the computer. Anyone have any questions before we sign off? No, we're all good. I hope you guys enjoyed. Not much more to say, I guess. I'll see you next week. I'm going to stop recording now.